Good morning. Welcome to the Joint Money Committee meeting. I'm Louise Lucas, and the Senate Finance Committee, Finance and Appropriations Committee Chair. Today, I will be chairing the meeting along with Delegate Torian, Chair of the House Appropriations Committee, and Delegate Watts, Chair of the House Finance Committee. The purpose of today's meeting is to receive the governor's remarks regarding the amendments to the biennial budget. We will hear from Governor Youngkin momentarily. His remarks will be followed with more detailed presentations by the Secretary of Finance, Steve Cummins, and the Director of the Department of Planning and Budget, Michael Moore. Now, I'll ask you to welcome His Excellency, Glenn Youngkin, Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you. Madam Chair, let's go to work.
Let's go to work, Governor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, with just 1 week until Christmas, I hope that all of your stockings have been hung with care, and that in this most important Advent season, we are all joined together, regardless of our faith traditions, by a shared commitment to one another. Lieutenant Governor Sears, members of my cabinet, Chair Lucas, Chair Torian, Chair Watts, members, and of course, the incredibly able staffs of the money committees, thank you for your leadership and your partnership. I'm joined this morning by Virginia's First Lady, my amazing wife, Suzanne Youngkin. We can clap there. I know that each of you will appreciate this truth. Our service to the Commonwealth would not be possible without the support of our spouses, our families, and our loved ones. And I want to thank at this time everyone's support infrastructure that allows us to do the work that we collectively do. It is such a joy to stand here today with shared credit for all of us to say simply, my friends, Virginia is roaring. Over the past nearly 3 years, we have worked together to catapult our beloved Commonwealth to incredible levels of growth. It's been a true partnership between our administration and all of you and so many others. Our collective, bold actions are working. Together, we provided generational tax relief, invested record amounts in education, public safety, and behavioral health. We reopened Virginia's economy after a global pandemic, all while delivering surplus after surplus after surplus. And as a result of our work together, Virginia is growing, Virginia is leading, and Virginia is winning. And this morning, I ask you to join me in continuing that work together. My main point today is simple. Let's keep going. Let's keep Virginia winning. When we started all of this in 2021, Virginia was bottom third in the nation in job growth. More businesses were leaving than coming. Over 23,000 small businesses were shuttered in 2021. We had a 20-year high in murder rate. Our 4th and 8th grade students had the largest learning loss in the nation in math and reading. More people were leaving than coming to the Commonwealth from the other 49 states for 9 straight years. And today, because of our collective work and recognizing there are moments along the way that we might not have agreed, everything is different. This year, Virginia was named the top state in America for business by CNBC. And just this week, we were named by Business Facilities as State of the Year, the best place to locate a business. More Virginians are working than ever before in the history of the Commonwealth, over 250,000 more than 3 years ago. Businesses have committed nearly $90 billion in capital to build factories, expand facilities, develop supply chains. Companies, jobs, and people are moving to this dynamic Old Dominion. We've seen a 34% decline in murders in some of our most violent localities in just 1 year. Chronic absenteeism is down, test scores are up, and last year, for the first time in 10 years, we saw more people move to the Commonwealth than from away from the Commonwealth to the other 49 states. Together, we can all be proud that Virginia is a place where people want to live and work and raise a family. Now, it is this growth in good jobs with strong wage growth, this growth in business investment, this growth in net population in migration, and our bipartisan, responsible budgeting that provides the foundation for a meaningful revenue reforecast for the fiscal years 2025 and 2026. Now, as a reminder, our current budget is based on a revenue forecast that we established in December of 2023, a time when the consensus outlook included a recession that did not happen. In fact, actual fiscal year 2024 results exceeded that forecast by $1.7 billion, and that included the additional $525 million we included in the Common Ground budget that we signed in May. However, no changes to fiscal year 2025 and 2026 forecasts were incorporated in that Common Ground budget. Indeed, when we left our Gaker meeting at the end of July, it was the overwhelming consensus that we should wait to reforecast until after the results of the election were known. At our November meeting, with the national elections behind us, we collectively decided it was prudent to establish a new baseline forecast. There is reason to be optimistic about our economic outlook. Small business optimism is at a 3-year high. Consumer confidence is rising rapidly. Foreign businesses are reshoring to America and Virginia. The stock market is strong. The Federal Reserve appears poised to reduce interest rates over the next year. This backdrop further supports Virginia's ongoing strong performance. Through November, revenues year to date were up 7.3% over 2024. And job growth and corporate investment continue to be strong. In fact, just yesterday, we made the exciting announcement that Commonwealth Fusion Systems will build a multi-billion-dollar fusion power plant right here in Virginia. Therefore, I'm presenting this morning a reforecast for 2025 and 2026 that incorporates $3.2 billion of incremental revenue over the biennium versus the Chapter 2 levels, which, again, were established back in December 2023. And of that $3.2 billion of incremental revenue, $2.1 billion is forecasted to be realized in 2025, and $1.1 billion forecasted to be realized in 2026. This new December forecast reflects a 4.1% growth over 2024, followed by a 2.5% growth in 2026. Again, this 4.1% growth rate compares to the 7.3% growth rate that we have already realized year to date, which means that as we stand here today, we are already $152 million ahead of this new December forecast. With this strong foundation and with our ongoing commitment to work together, I firmly believe that we can build on our successes and Virginia will keep winning. Now, to keep Virginia winning for Virginia families, we must continue to lower the cost of living. And there are three common sense components that I am including in my budget amendments this morning. Together, we have provided Virginia families over $5 billion of tax relief. And yet, government tax receipts continue to grow. And I appreciate the sentiments expressed recently by Chair Lucas and Speaker Scott, both of whom voiced their support for additional tax relief for hard-working Virginia families. Together, the Commonwealth can make a clear statement that reducing tax burdens so Virginians can keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets is not a Republican idea, it's not a Democrat idea, it's just common sense. And therefore, let's give Virginia families relief on the most hated tax in America since the tax on tea, the local car tax. Today in Virginia, a typical family of four who has a car would pay on average $290 in what's affectionately called the car tax. Standing here today, I will renew my call for us to work to fully eliminate the car tax, but recognizing that this might not be possible in this short session, there is an incremental step that we should take together to provide additional car tax relief. Under my amendments this morning, a family of four will be fully reimbursed with the working class car tax credit, a permanent refundable income tax credit of up to $150 for individuals earning under $50,000 a year, and up to $300 for joint filers with under $100,000 of annual income. The cost of this working class car tax credit will be covered for the first 3 years with a $1.1 billion deposit into a car tax relief fund, using the strength of our surplus of this year to provide ongoing tax relief for these worthy Virginians. With the surplus we have, it's time for us to make another down payment in ending this most hated tax on hardworking Virginians. The second component recognizes Virginia has an incredible hospitality, restaurant, and service industry. Hardworking Virginians should keep every penny of the tips they earn through their exceptional service. My proposal is very simple. No more taxes on tips. You earn it, you keep it. This reduces taxes on Virginians by $70 million a year. Third, we must make the existing Virginia standard deduction permanent. Concurrently, the existing standard deduction of $8,500 for single individuals and $17,000 for joint filers is set to expire on January 1st, 2026. Failure to make the standard deduction permanent prior to January 1st, 2026 would result in tax increases of $557 million in fiscal year 2026 and $1.2 billion in fiscal year 2027. My friends, there is no reason to raise taxes on Virginians. We are running surplus after surplus after surplus. Let's make the standard deduction permanent. We are also proposing to modernize the tax code by moving to market-based sourcing for income taxes paid by our service sector companies. Under market-based sourcing, all service sales are sourced to where the corporation's market or customers are located. Market-based sourcing ensures that our out-of-state businesses are paying their fair share, and it protects in-state businesses from double taxation from market-based states. This is pro-business, does not have a projected cost over time to the state, and targets the fastest growing sector of the economy, the service sector, and the jobs that come with it. Also, all but 12 states employ market-based sourcing, and we expect knowledge-based workers to account for 62% of future U.S. job growth. This is a winner for Virginia. These steps will make our Commonwealth even more business-friendly, give hardworking Virginians relief from the sting of inflation from these past few years, and demonstrate clearly what is possible when we work together. Now, that's important because we need to keep this strong economy going with good jobs for young people. We must continue to unleash this unbridled opportunity that we are seeing across the Commonwealth, raise the bar for academic excellence, keep our children safe, and support our military members and their families. To keep Virginia winning for families, we must continue to press forward on what has been the most aggressive education funding agenda in the history of the Commonwealth. And I want to thank all of you for the collaborative work here. With the amendments I am offering today, which total to an additional $1 billion, our shared commitment to K through 12 public education will exceed $22 billion over the biennium. There's $290 million for school construction and modernization, which brings our total for the biennium to $700 million. There's an additional $550 million in direct aid, money that goes right into our schools and our classrooms. There's an additional $6.8 million for school resource officers and school security officers, bringing us to more than $50 million for the biennium. We've included $50 million for schools that have been identified as needing the most help by our school performance framework. And there's $110 million for English language learners. I hope my actions during the past 3 years demonstrate how committed I am to strong, excellent public schools that produce strong, excellent students. The work we have done together to boost teacher pay, drive higher school performance, expand funding and support for early childhood education and childcare, recognizing that a robust, accountable public school system with high expectations is essential for the future of Virginia. I will continue to be committed to that. And I also want to empower lower-income parents with more opportunities for their children. I know we all agree that no student should be denied the opportunity to pursue the education that meets their needs. And that's why today I am proposing a new $50 million Virginia Opportunity Scholarship Program. K through 12 students from families at or below twice the federal limit to qualify for free school meals will be eligible to apply for a $5,000 grant each year to support their educational needs: tuition, uniform, books, supplies, fees, and transportation for an education at any private school in the Commonwealth of Virginia. These funds will support 10,000 students. This scholarship program, funded by our revenue growth and not from a single penny of existing educational funding, would serve 10,000 Virginians out of our 1.2 million public school students. More importantly, though, it would provide that in Virginia, we can support opportunity in education and continue to support our public schools with record funding. Our work to establish innovative lab schools in partnership with our institutions of higher education is absolutely paying off. To date, we have 15 lab schools, 6 currently open, 9 opening in the fall of this next year, that have consumed the $75 million of current funds. We have lab schools that are preparing kids to teach in underserved areas, lab schools that are focused on our healthcare industries where A student can start work as a radiation tech or go to medical school. We have lab schools that are preparing students for a career in space, lab schools that are preparing students to code or work in cybersecurity. But our work is not done. To drive new pathways for communities that have not yet been served, we have included $25 million of incremental lab school partnership funding to be put to use with our historically black colleges and universities. Last year, we had multiple applications from our HBCUs, and those applications should be funded. I'm proud of our shared investment with our HBCUs since I took office, with the highest per student investment in the last 30 years. Expanding our lab school partnerships is the next step in demonstrating what we can do through these partnerships. Indeed, Virginia is internationally recognized for our great universities and colleges. We largely agree, however, that the cost of attending those institutions has grown too much, too quickly for Virginians. Together, we have increased funding for higher education to levels not seen since the Great Recession. And while we have included nearly $500 million in capital funds for higher ed, my amendments include no new operating funding for our colleges and universities and include a 2.5% cap on tuition increases. I've been clear with our boards of visitors and presidents. It's time for our colleges to cut the administrative bloat, find savings, and get a handle on cost escalations without asking taxpayers for more money. One area where we must not sacrifice is our commitment to our military veterans and their families. This summer, again, we worked well together to restore the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program. We will continue that work together, and therefore I am proposing an additional $120 million, $60 million each year, to allow our heroes and their families to pursue their educational dreams at Virginia schools. This historic investment also includes a sustainable funding mechanism, combining general funds already appropriated with $60 million annually from the actuarial surplus amounts of the defined benefit 529 programs. According to the projections from the State Council of Higher Education, this total investment will fully fund the VMSDEP waiver. We owe it to their families to deliver on the promises we have made to make higher education accessible and affordable. We are supporting hard-working Virginians, more jobs, great education, and allowing them to keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets. To keep Virginia winning, we must continue to strengthen Virginia's economy. To attract and train the best talent, my budget proposals this morning include an additional $13.9 million in funding for nursing and nursing recruitment and training programs, an additional $35 million to fund high school dual enrollment and career and technical education. We need more good-paying jobs, more great companies that choose to locate and expand in Virginia. And so, building on our massive investment to date in site readiness, I am also proposing $50 million of incremental funding for business-ready sites. It is our investment into site readiness that allows Virginia to compete so effectively for the historic economic development projects like our announcement last month at Berry Hill, when we welcomed Microporus's 2,000 jobs and $1.3 billion investment in Virginia. Business-ready sites drive and accelerate economic growth. We must continue to back our law enforcement and drive safe communities. In the last few years, every state has become a border state, and violent crime has impacted Virginia families. Several localities, local jails in Virginia, have implemented sanctuary policies, including ignoring orders issued by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE detainers, and neglecting to notify ICE prior to inmate release. That's why I'm proposing that if any state adopts a sanctuary practice, meaning a practice that impedes communications and cooperations when an illegal immigrant who commits a crime in Virginia and is detained and is subject to an ICE detainer, if they don't comply, they should lose their funding. I'd ask us all to put our constituents ahead of those who commit violent crimes and are subject to an ICE detainer order. This should be common sense. I don't think anybody wants an illegal immigrant who has committed a serious and violent crime to be released back in the community. We will keep Virginia winning as we deliver for Virginians the need for behavioral health care. To date, we've invested $1.4 billion in Right Help Right Now, and it has transformed the way we are serving Virginians. They are getting the right help when they need it. We've seen substantial progress with more capacity, better services, and lives changed. I've always been clear, this is a 3-year transformation program. We've been through 2 years. There's 1 year to go. The year 3 efforts require that we further reduce the burdens on law enforcement, but also create safer, more appropriate environments for individuals in crisis to receive the care that they need. After a successful pilot in Southwest Virginia, we are now proposing to add $35 million in funding to employ special conservators of the peace, affectionately called SCOPs, across the Commonwealth to transfer custody while individuals are awaiting placement for care. And this will immediately put law enforcement officers back to work. The average time when we started this journey together in 2022 that a sheriff's deputy spent in a hospital with a patient seeking a placement was more than 50 hours. While our expansion of the crisis system will reduce that need over time, we must provide relief to these law enforcement heroes now and get them out of the waiting room and back to work on the streets. SCOPs have proven that they can do that. In addition to renovate, repair, and upgrade behavioral health facilities, we've included over $50 million for much needed work. At the heart of a winning Virginia is a healthy Virginia. Critically, we must always support mothers. Today, leading causes of maternal death are cardiovascular disease and mental health conditions, along with cancer. And while many rural communities and urban communities are maternal health care deserts, over 80% of maternal deaths are preventable. And that's why we're investing to expand perinatal health hubs, increase payments for OBGYN residencies, and launch a statewide maternal health education campaign. These investments will support the healthcare heroes and hospitals who work to safely deliver babies. And it provides incremental support for access to doulas, midwives, and those who care for mothers throughout pregnancy and postpartum. Ensuring Virginia has healthy moms, healthy families, and healthy communities. We also will meet the required need for Medicaid. My budget amendments this morning fully fund the official Medicaid and associated rate forecasts with over $687 million, and also include $105 million for the Children's Services Act. To keep protecting Virginia's natural resources, I'm proposing an incremental $50 million for the Richmond Combined Sewer Overflow Project, $17.4 million for additional wastewater treatment projects, and $26 million for ag BMPs. Now, I have stood in front of you many times, and each time I have repeated my commitment to our Chesapeake Bay goals. We have made substantial progress over the past 3 years, and we will continue to drive to work to preserve this most cherished natural resource. Finally, to keep Virginians working for Virginians, we must continue to drive efficiency and effectiveness in our state government, and therefore we must advance many IT projects that are needed to not put our state functionality at risk. We're including over $227 million in our budget to address Virginia's technology debt by advancing critical projects, including the Integrated Revenue Management System at tax. Folks, we need to make sure we collect our taxes efficiently and effectively. And the Department of Education's student testing system, which needs a material overhaul. And we have also included $20 million of IT security to protect Virginia's data. It's absolutely critical that our government is fortified and buttressed in order to serve our 8.7 million bosses, and especially as we bring our IT systems into the 21st century. I think this is responsible government. Let me lastly touch on one of our most recent examples of the collective strength in Virginia. At the end of September, Southwest Virginia specifically was hit by its most significant disaster since 2011. Week after week, I visited families and communities in Southwest Virginia in the wake of Hurricane Helene, assessing the damage that floodwaters had ravaged over these communities, and candidly standing in awe of the grit and determination that they responded with. Roads that had been washed out, houses were picked up off their foundations, stories of loss, of livelihoods foregone, and yet neighbors helping neighbors, heroic rescues, churches partnering with other churches across Virginia. It's truly inspiring. I've worked with our local delegation. I've worked with Senator Warner and Senator Kane's offices, Congressman Griffith, Klein, and every other of our congressional delegation. I've called and prodded the White House, the FEMA administrator, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Forestry Service, and everybody else who will take a phone call from me. It has been a collective effort to ensure that we repair and rebuild these communities. In my amendments, I've included $25 million from the general fund and $125 million from non-general funds to establish a permanent disaster assistance fund, a fund that would be administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Let's call this a true rainy day reserve fund. It is intended to allow then the General Assembly to assist families with housing and other critical needs who are the victims of natural disasters beyond what FEMA and other federal resources, insurance, or private donations can meet. With this reserve fund established, I fully expect that the General Assembly and our administration will work constructively together in this next short session to appropriate funds specifically for Hurricane Helene relief. I know that together we can rebuild stronger than ever. And so I end where I began. What we are doing is working. Virginia is soaring. And so let's keep Virginia winning. We are now among the top states competing for jobs and opportunities. These budget amendments build on that success. We must continue to reduce tax burdens on hardworking Virginians. We must continue to invest in economic development. We must continue to provide educational opportunity to all Virginians. We must continue to support law enforcement and bolster behavioral health. We must continue to unleash growth and opportunity. And as I've said many, many times, this is a both and moment. We can collectively get this done. I want to thank each and every one of you for your partnership. I look forward to this next session where we can keep working together to keep Virginia winning. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you, Governor Youngkins. And at this time, I'd like for Secretary Cummings to proceed with his presentation, and I would ask that you will hold your questions until the end of the presentation.
Chair Watts, thank you very much. Members of Money Committee and staff, I'm delighted to be in front of you today to follow the governor and report out more detail on what he has just talked about. I will move quickly to do my best not to duplicate what he has just said. I think the bottom line is that I think we all could be proud that this is a very positive report on the state of affairs in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So, quick summary. As we all know, in FY 2024, we closed with $1.7 billion ahead of December 23 forecast and a surplus of $1.2 billion above the official forecast. Current year-to-date FY 25 trends continue to show strength as our economy continues to grow, most importantly in the most important category, which is in our withholding, which is almost 60% of total revenue receipts. So that is our main engine, and it continues to really move forward very positively. Grew by 4.8% FY 2024, and unbelievably at 6.9% year-to-date, indicating the ongoing strength of our job market. Preliminary data suggests, as the governor mentioned, the decade-long loss of residents on a net basis to other states. We don't have the final detail, but it is clear that that has now reversed, which is a huge accomplishment for all of us. Total revenues for November through November are $763 million, higher 7.3% than prior year, again driven mainly by withholding. We've gone through the process with JABE and Gaker, and the proposed 25-26 budget amendments reflect a revenue outlook that is modestly higher than the baseline that was presented to them in November, which anticipated somewhat slower growth, a more cautious outlook. The Fed has signaled further rate cuts coming up. They've already done 50 basis points to date, and the markets currently expect 75 basis points over the course of the next year. We all know what sectors that's going to help benefit, which do need help of lower rates. Given the strength in year-to-date revenues versus Chapter 2, revenues for the remainder of the year could decline by almost 9%, and we would still meet that original forecast on Chapter 2. Accordingly, the December forecast adds $3.2 billion, 2.1 in 25, 1.1 in 26 to our Chapter 2 forecast, and now through November, revenues are already exceeding that forecast by $153 million, putting money in the bank ahead of the remaining 7 months of the year. So given the year-to-date revenue growth of 7.3% and the assumption of 4.1% in the overall forecast, revenues for the remainder of the year could grow by only 2.3%. This is a historical look at how the world has fared. I think we all know that we've had an incredible run of years starting back in FY 2022. The green portion of the bar shows you forecast adjustments in each year. And then on top of those forecast adjustments, it shows you what actually was achieved and the resulting surplus. So we've consistently adjusted 22. We added $1.2 billion mid-session. At year end, we actually had a surplus of 1.8 over that. 23 actual revenues exceeded December forecast by 1.5 billion and exceeded the official forecast by 3 billion, because as we know, the budget was delayed, so the December forecast was never adopted. In 2024, we took $546 million, was added to that forecast to close the gap on the budget discussions in May, and recognizing the overperformance relative to forecasts and core revenue areas is what funded that $550 million. At the time, no adjustments were made for FY 25-26, given that a large portion of that was attributable non-withholding and refunds. And we've been consistently cautious on how we use that money, but we've benefited from the consistent surplus in that area. So the December forecast adds 2.1 in 25, 1.1 in 26, reflecting growth of 4.1% and 2.5% in those 2 years. A quick look back to 24. Fiscal year 24 revenues exceeded official forecast by 1.2 billion, 1.17. For the year, total general fund revenues grew by 5.5% versus an increase of 1.3% assumed in Chapter 1. And excluding non-withholding and refunds, revenues exceeded the forecast by 76 million, showing that we have actually a good forecasting process led by our revenue forecast team. These two sources accounted for 1.1 billion, this is non-withholding and refunds, you can see, accounted for 1.1 billion of the 1.2 billion positive variance. Other major sources, withholding receipts totaled 16.7 billion compared to 16.0 billion, yielding a 4.8% growth, and receipts exceeded the forecast and assumed in the amended budget by $155 million. Sales and use taxes, 4.7 billion against prior year of 4.7. It shows down. What we need to remember is that the prior year included a partial year on grocery taxes, and this year did not. So if you adjust for that, actually, we had a modest growth in sales and use taxes. Employment is the most important source of our revenues, as I've said, and this shows you Virginia employment has been growing consistently at 4.2 million workers, the largest in history, and that the employment grew by 1.8% in 2024, and the average wages grew by 5%. Very, very healthy growth rates. We've had questions before asking about where the growth is coming from. This shows you from the pre-pandemic 2019, the depth of the pandemic, and then where we are today. And it shows you that after steep declines, every sector is now above the pre-pandemic level. We did have a slow start, but now everything is back to it being more of what it was. I think very importantly that one of the highest growth areas is professional and business services at 6.5%. I think we all know that's one of our main engines for our economy. It's the biggest sector in Virginia, and to see that kind of growth is fantastic. Government is, I think, positive, and I think encouraging that our private sector has been meaningfully outstripping the government sector. Private in total is over 5%. This is a chart that shows you the updated numbers on the net domestic migration, and goes back to 2013, the last year that we had a positive year. I think you all remember my first Money Committee meeting in January of 2022, when we shared this chart. It was a metric that's been used by the governor in his campaign, and it reflected a real concern that we had a leak in our bucket, that every year we were losing Virginia families at a higher rate than new families moving to Virginia. They were taking their jobs, their families, and their adjusted gross income, most importantly, to other states. And we, like others to our north, were actually we're contributing to that. And now I think as a reflection of all the great work that's been done, which is this metric is used quite a bit because the governor will say this is a test of the collective efforts of all of us on what we do in Virginia and the reaction by people who vote with their feet. And I think this is a cause for great celebration that has now turned. The momentum in our financial performance has continued into FY 2025. Year to date, revenues are $763 million higher than last year. That's 7.3% year-over-year growth rate through November. Withholding, driven by strength in wages, is up $450 million, 6.9% year to date, as I stated earlier. Non-withholding is up dramatically. There's a lot of stuff still going on in the refunds and rebates and non-withholding that we can talk about, but it's the same story there. And all major revenue sources are higher year over year, except for corporate income tax, which I will also talk about. There is a concern. The movement is largely, again, in the refund issue that we've talked about in prior meetings with you. If you look at actually the payments for this year's income results for corporates, what we call contemporaneous corporate income tax payments, those are actually up slightly. So we think underlying that our corporations are performing okay. U.S. economy continues to grow at a healthy pace. Expansion in economic activity and continued in the third quarter. GDP rose 2.8%, following a 3% gain in the second quarter. Consumer spending remains an important source of growth in the third quarter, adding 2.4 percentage points to growth compared to 1.9 percentage points in the prior quarter. I think this is really important. President Barkin of the Richmond Fed, after he looks at this, looks at inflation, looks at jobs, and looks at the strength of the consumer. And this is one that is, for him, the most important barometer of how the world is feeling and what we should be looking forward to. And obviously, this engine, the consumer, has been continuing to be strong, which drives our economy. Payroll employment rose by 227,000 in November. Significant improvement after the hurricanes and strikes weighed on October numbers, as you see. And revisions to prior months were all positive in October and September. For Virginia, for October, the most recent data released in Virginia employment continues to show year-over-year growth. While October's preliminary readings showed a net month-over-month decline of 3,000, those figures were obviously impacted by Hurricane Helene. We expect those to be revised down the road. Unemployment rate is unchanged for Virginia at 2.9%, while the nationwide increased a notch to 4.2%. Inflation, the most watched number by everybody, and they continue to moderate. The headline Consumer Price Index rose from October to November a bit, not so much to represent a worrying deviation from where we've been heading, according to most people who talk about it, but it's being watched. Core CPI was up 3.3% in November, and the preferred rate for the Fed is the personal consumption expenditure, which is the yellow line, which is now at the 2.3% level. So still being encouraged. I'd say this notch up did cast a little bit of uncertainty about what the Fed might do, and those expectations have pulled back a notch, which is shown here. So we show the rates, what has happened to Fed rates to date, and then the right side is the market-implied probability of rate cuts, which is notched back a bit. If you go back a month or so, it was estimating 100, 125 basis points over the course of the next year, and you can see here that 60% of the market believes that we'll see cuts totaling about 75 basis points. We will get a next indication of that this afternoon. But the Fed is meeting today and will be releasing their decision on the December rate changes. So the governor mentioned here, these are 4 different studies, surveys, indexes that measure sentiment, which is small businesses, large businesses, and consumer. The bottom line is they are all positive, continuing to be positive, and actually increasing a bit with what's going on in the economy. So everything is I won't say full speed ahead, but people feeling pretty good about where we stand. So with revenues well ahead of Chapter 2, I think it's clear that we all expected there would be a substantial upward adjustment to our FY 2025 revenues. We've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time, working with a forecast that goes back to a kind of uncertain and kind of a gray outlook back a year ago in that November, December timeframe, that if we all remember Gaker in particular. And you can see as of this point in time, with revenues ahead of last year by 7.3%, that revenues could decline, this is the next to last column, by 8.7% for the rest of the year. We'd still meet Chapter 2. In that same period in the prior year, the last column, those revenues actually grew by 3.6%, just as an indicator of the trends that we've got. Strong year to date, strong last year, same period. We have a very conservative number built in that would get us to Chapter 2. So moving into the December forecast and kind of the walk through what has happened here with some key metrics, you can see that members of Gaker in our November meeting were generally more optimistic with regard to growth assumed in our November outlook. We deliver an outlook to them. It was conservative, slow growth. As we went around that room, the consensus was that everybody was at least at forecast, base forecast, and then some were at base plus, and then one was at above baseline. So that it was basically a base to a slightly positive view, which drew a decision that we would modestly raise the forecast, the December forecast. You can see that all here in the long-run average for these gross state product, average wage growth, and employment. That the numbers in the left-hand column, 24, were much stronger than the long-run average. 25 to date, also positive versus long-run. But our December forecast, you can see, actually was pretty conservative numbers for 25 and 26, meaningfully below all of the left-hand columns. Again, and I think this is consistent with how we all look at this, maintaining prudence in how we're going to build our budget and feeling like we have a margin to work with as we get through the rest of the year. December forecast adds $2.1 billion in FY 2025, $1.1 billion in FY 2026, $3.2 billion overall. Individual income, the sum total of withholding, non-withholding, and refunds is predicted to come in at 2.3 and 1.1 billion higher than Chapter 2, 3.4 billion total. Non-withholding accounts for 1.8 billion of that 3.4 billion increase. And we've actually built in on corporate income tax a very conservative corporate income tax view reflecting some of the things that have taken place to date. So we feel like we have a cautious outlook on what will play out with that. So on refunds, individual income tax refunds. So as you know, this has been an area that has been very difficult given the taxpayer behavior and the impact of PTET payments. And we've been following this for now a couple of years, and PTET has created challenges. We now added that this year we have the tax year 21 PTET payments were made eligible to be actually only submitted and refunded within this current tax year. The top chart, just very quickly, shows you the actuals versus the Chapter 2 forecast. The Chapter 2 forecast are the gray lines. And you can see the adjustment now because our team has more data. They've refined the forecast on a monthly basis. So the bottom of that, the left-hand chart, shows the updated forecast. And you can see that the gray bars move more of the revenues into the first half, largely due to the tax year 21 payments, and less into the back half. So those gray bars are what goes into the chart on the right, and that is showing that we had spikes in last year for the 2023 numbers, which are impacted by rebates, so that's adjusted for that. And that we're going to be back on track, more consistent with what happened in FY 2022 in terms of normal trends, which is we expect to be more the case this year. But we think as a result of this, that if through the first 5 months of the fiscal year, refund volume is down 9.6%, and in order to meet forecasts, the rest of the year needs only to decline by 3.3%. So we have a strong perspective that we have a reasonable forecast. There should not be a surprise here. This shows the Chapter 1 and 2 forecast versus our new December forecast. Chapter 1, as you all remember, reflects inclusion of the first. It has an inflation impact, but it does reflect the $550 million that went back in for FY 2024 and adjusted in the December 23 adopted budget. And the forecast impact here you can see, which creates the December forecast, is kind of back on a revenue trend that goes back to 2017. So this is the breakdown of the December forecast into its component parts. Forecast presented at Gaker, anticipated growth of 3.6% in 25, 2.7 in 26. Following that discussion, growth assumptions were revised slightly higher, generating, you can see on the right-hand side, 258.8 of incremental adjustments due to economic outlook adjustments. And then the next down, policy adjustments, reflects the policies that the governor mentioned, very minimal. As you understand, the car tax fund is a one-time deposit, and this is the sum total of the impact of the other things mentioned by him in the current biennium. So year to date, again, I won't go through this, but we're $153 million ahead of the December forecast. We have 5 months of the fiscal year complete, and we are 1.4% ahead of forecast year to date. Which, going back to the analysis of what does that mean for what we have to do for the rest of the year versus what we did versus last year, you can see that we only need 2.3% growth in the revenues for the rest of the year versus for the same, versus the first 5 months of 7.3%, and last year's growth for the remaining 7 months of 3.6%. It's another test of reasonableness. So, into policy actions that the governor discussed. So this shows the sum total of policy adjustments related to what the governor has included in his budget. The governor's plan would address the local car tax, creating a permanent refundable income tax credit for hardworking low and middle income families. This would be implemented in tax year 2025, pre-funded for 3 years out of the surplus, and adjustments have been made to extend this benefit to our long-term forecast, 2029 and after. This benefit would go to 1.9 million filers, estimate probably at least 2.5 million citizens who would benefit from this, and it is so that is the impact of that going forward. That impact long-term is included in our 6-year forecast, which you'll see at the end of this. The next is the standard deduction permanent. This would protect Virginians from a very large tax increase of $1.2 billion if this was allowed to expire. And we believe that it is wise to deal with this now, so there is good certainty for taxpayers about what they can expect coming as they prepare for the coming year. Tax on tips, third component of the plan, exempt tips for the workers who are operating in this industry sector, $70 million into 250,000 estimated taxpayers as part of also lowering the cost of living for our low and middle income working families. EISTC, so this is actually just taking the introduced budget and moving this back to make sure what's in the budget allows for full utilization of what is already there. $25 million is what it was designed to be. It has not been fully utilized, so the budget took away $4 million. The governor would like to do a better job of communicating the benefits and availability of this and hope that we can get full utilization of the $25 million. Market-based sourcing, which is the governor has addressed, and I will get into in more detail in a minute. It does not have any impact on the current biennium due to implementation timing required to do it. It will have some impact, which I will talk about as we get into FY27 and beyond. Initially, some negative, but then and beyond becomes a positive number. Modernizing the requirement for estimated tax payments. This is taking the estimated tax payments from $150 to $1,000, a very outdated threshold for making estimated payments, and it results in a one-time negative, which is exclusively timing. They've been prepaying by doing estimated payments, and that is now going to be moved to eliminated. Then the rest of that 1.1 is actually elimination of penalties that these taxpayers, lower income taxpayers, have had to make because they have missed the deadlines. So I think all in all, a good outcome. I'm sorry. And the last is interest payments. The Commonwealth charges 2% more than what is prescribed in the federal tax provisions. And basically, we are proposing that and that encourages people to hold their money longer when it is a credit due, because they're getting a premium interest rate. And it also penalizes people who are late or we are slow in refunding. And the net benefit of that is that it would actually lead to a positive outcome of $4 million, because we are holding more of those refunds and therefore being forced to pay interest, but more importantly, a premium level of interest, which we think should come down. Car tax credit, this would, you can see, we think a very progressive tax proposal, benefiting 2.5 million filers, 100,000 joint, 50,000 single. This would not negatively impact localities' ability to sustain their current tax collections. Localities do not need to be involved in this transaction. Taxpayers need to show evidence that they have paid property tax, and they will be refunded to the extent that they have made those payments with these limits in mind. Pre-funded for the first 3 years, made permanent then for going forward. At about $370 million is the amount going forward beyond into FY 2027. I think no tax on tips is, I think, quite clear, very straightforward. Cost $35 million in the first year, and $70 million would be the run rate going forward. Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions set to expire will result in $400 billion per year federal tax increase with higher rates and other charges. But we do not believe that the changes in the provisions will have much effect, if any, on Virginia. Lowering federal corporate tax rate, the SALT limitation adjustment are two of the big ones which would not have an impact on Virginia. The standard deduction, which has been increased over time, set to expire at the end of 2025. We think it's very wise, as we've said before, to implement that now and give assurance to our taxpayers that this is something they can count on going forward, as opposed to implementing a very large tax increase. To that point, you can see here, reminding everything that you and the governor have done in raising the standard deduction over the course of several years, and that it's now at $8,500 and $17,000 for joint filers, and it would drop all the way back to $3,000 and $6,000 if we allow it to expire. $557 million in 26, $1.2 billion in FY 27. In the world of modernization, market-based sourcing, a key tenet or priority for our VEDP strategy. As you all may remember, VEDP adopted a new strategic plan, which was to prioritize several sectors. Services is number one, and this is a critical element in that strategy that we need to address, modernizing the estimated payment levels, and then equalizing rates. On market-based sourcing, you can see here, just so you understand, that cost of performance that we currently follow is, for everybody, is where property is, where intangible property or sales, it's where that property is delivered. For the two categories, intangible and services, it is where the cost of performance. So companies in the service sector would be paying their tax generally where their headquarters are and most of their employees are. Market-based sourcing, it's the same for tangible property. There's no change to those corporations, but it is now taking intangibles and services and treating them as if they were tangible property. Basically, you would be taxed where that service is delivered. And the problem is, if you are in Virginia, where you have to pay now on cost of performance, you are now having to pay the market-based sourcing approach for the 39 other states that have already implemented this. So you'd be in effect double taxed because you're paying for full income here in Virginia, basically, and then you're having to pay in all those other states what you sell into those states. And for that reason, that's why it's a real deterrent to these types of companies choosing to headquarter in Virginia. And for those of you who have been involved in MEI and going back in time, we have two great examples here in Virginia. PRA in Hampton Roads, it's a debt collection company. They asked for and were given market-based sourcing as a treatment, which was done one-off. And most recently, CoStar, which not only went to Richmond in a big way, but now is moving its headquarters to Northern Virginia. They got the same treatment, but only by request. The other states have implemented this, and it's really important for us in that critical sector to be able to tell them that this is a by right capability for that specific sector. So if we look at this, the governor was right in what he said, that we would be one of 12 states that have not yet implemented this. But there's another element of detail here where actually of those 12, 4 of those states don't have corporate income taxes. So in effect, we're one of 8 states that could implement. Actually, implementing market-based sourcing would be beneficial if you wanted to make sure you were addressing this space. And we are one of 8 that have not yet done it. You can see it's basically the whole country. And if you look at this knowledge work, which is what VEDP uses as their industry sector, we have people who come from this space in VEDP who are leading the origination strategically to go after these companies. You can see those 3 areas: aerospace defense, business financial services, software, cybersecurity. I think we all know this is Virginia. This is what we're built to be best in class at. But we are not attractive to companies who we should have here, but we are going to be a more costly place to do business. And at the bottom, if you go to the chart, you can see over the next decade, over 60% of the incremental growth in jobs is going to come from this sector. So we over-index in this now, but we've been under-indexing in incremental jobs being added recently. And we believe that this has something to do with that we are not, we don't know that we miss them. Fortunately, CoStar and PRA, we talked and they said we need this. But a lot of people just don't look at Virginia because the rest of the world is doing what is kind of commonplace for this critical sector. No impact in the current biennium, but just to be clear, going into 27 and beyond, there will be an initial impact of rough estimating 20 to 25 million based upon the models that the tax team has done. The driver of, and then it will turn positive gradually over the next couple of years. The driver of this is the compliance of other companies, service companies who are doing business in Virginia, and us. It's like what was done with with products that were delivered to Amazon, is just making sure that we collected taxes, stuff that was shipped into Virginia, not bought through a store. And this is the same analogy, is we need to make sure that everyone knows we're doing this and we're monitoring it, and we will accelerate compliance on this as much as possible. Threshold for estimated tax payments, I think this is self-explanatory. You can see Maryland is at 500 and Kentucky. North Carolina is at 1,000. We're at 150. It's been at that number for 40 years. So we believe that this is a lot of extra work for a lot of taxpayers, lower income taxpayers. And the fact that we're collecting penalties of $1 million annually from that taxpayer base, it just doesn't feel right. So this feels like something that would be a logical update and not very costly. And then back on our interest rates, really is getting us to a place that is consistent with federal, eliminating incentives for people who are due a refund not to go get it, and then also eliminating penalties when we are so underpayment and overpayment. So creating false incentives about what happens with the payments and just making it where it's a net neutral. And the result is that there is a cost of this of $10 million and save for taxpayers, $10 million loss for us in revenues. Just to close here, Reserve balances, want to remind you that we are in great shape. We do believe 15% is the right number. I know it was raised to 20%. We were asked to do a study on this a couple years ago. We delivered a response to that. We think by all metrics, 15% is a very, very appropriate number. Going beyond that, you can always say more is better, but this is taxpayer money, and it's sitting there just earning interest. We think 15 is adequate. And just to emphasize this is a chart we showed you back in August that shows what's happened since the pandemic. And frankly, thanks to the good financial position and the good discipline of Virginia, we have raised the actual balances from being number 14 amongst the AAA rated states up to number 3. So we're in great shape relative to others, and I think we all know that it is being managed very prudently. Long-term outlook, this is just saying that we need to make sure we test this. It's a part of code, and this shows you that we are structurally balanced throughout the 6-year period, including all the tax policy items that we have presented to you. And that concludes my presentation. I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you, Secretary Cummings. Any questions of the Secretary?
Madam Chair.
Senator Deeds.
Mr. Secretary, it does not appear that the market-based sourcing impact is captured in the 27 revenue forecast. My question is it in the out-year revenue forecast? If not, how does that impact the 6-year plan?
So that very good catch. It is not in there. It's $24 million in the first year. This was a late catch of something that did not make it in. As tax showed us the details of that, it's $24 million is the first year impact. But you can see by the last chart, which shows the structural balance, we have well over that in excess reserves at the end of 27 to cover that number. So not a concern. Thank you.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Further questions of the Secretary? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think I saw Delegate Sullivan's hand first and then Delegate Watt.
I'll defer to the chair. That's fine.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Following up first directly on the previous question, so I look forward to a strong discussion on the market-based sourcing. Is that $24 million loss because we have traditionally had the issue of so many of our contractors working for the federal government, so the service is delivered on the other side of the Potomac rather than in Virginia, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't changed?
That's one way to say it. It is obviously the people who are here, who are service businesses, will immediately take advantage of this because they've been paying on the other approach. And so there will be an immediate loss from those who are currently reside here who then are moving to market-based sourcing. Then the pickup is going to be completely dependent on, as I said, capturing all others who come here and are selling services into the Pentagon and all the other entities within the Commonwealth.
One follow-up question on this area.
Secretary Watts?
The follow-up question on this area, have you looked at other states as to whether or not there's it's either or is there any way that we can reflect the fact of the economy in Virginia that's dependent upon federal contracts?
It's certainly on our mind. We're aware of some of our current employers who have struggled with this in the past, and we've actually talked to them. And one most notable conversation was, I don't like it. It complicates my life, but I'm doing it in 38 other states already. And so they're adjusting for that as we speak. And I think basically the message was this feels a bit inevitable. So not as much pushback as I think we've heard in the past when it was being adopted in other places.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If
I reached way back to call you Secretary.
That's all right.
Not many people remember that.
I was on that side.
I
at one
remember.
time. Yeah.
I went back a ways to call you Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could be,
Chairwoman Watts.
Madam Chair, if I could be recognized at a later time on other tax issues. Thank you.
Sure. Delegate Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. During his remarks, the governor mentioned something about using a surplus in the 529 account to pay for something, but but I missed what we're going to use that money for, and what is the actuarial surplus in the 529?
So 529 has a number of different accounts. In a defined benefit account that they have managed, they've accumulated a reserve that has been recognized as much as $1 billion. There was a JLARC study done on this in the last couple months, which confirmed this, and there's been an ongoing discussion about what those funds should be used for. It's the view of the administration that those funds are funds for the Commonwealth, and that the recommendation is that we set up a fixed $60 million per year contribution coming from those funds, which they'll continue to manage, that go and permanently fund the remainder of the VMES debt requirement.
So those funds are going to be the VIMS debt?
They will go into VMES debt through SHEV to take care of the VMES debt liability in full.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Madam
Further questions of the Secretary? Senator Favola.
Thank you so much. I remain concerned that the federal government is possibly going to reduce the federal match for the Medicaid expansion program, may possibly eliminate the subsidies that Virginians are currently accessing when they're taking insurance on our exchange. These will be large fiscal impact numbers with incredible impacts on Virginians. And you, as well as many others, know that when folks are insured, their productivity goes up. We've enjoyed higher tax returns. There are incredible benefits to having all Virginians insured. So my request is as we go forward and we do a granular analysis of the budget, which we will have to do and should do in due diligence, I would hope the administration would be very amenable to continuing, at a minimum, our policy of ensuring as many Virginians as need insurance and need a subsidy.
Thank you. We have fully provided for all the liabilities that we know of around Medicaid and have built in growth in our 6-year plan for that to continue. I think Secretary Kelly, I'm sure, will look forward to having those conversations with you going forward.
Delegate Candy King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Question on slide 8. There is this immigration turned positive in 2024. We've heard a lot about government efficiency at the federal level, and we have hundreds of thousands of federal employees in Virginia, especially in Northern Virginia. Have you all had any plans or strategy around the federal government's plan to close entire departments and relocate employees, and how that might impact our budget numbers?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely. It is one that's very definitely on the radar screen. I think there's a lot of talk of very aggressive actions at the moment. I think we start with understanding or agreeing that we have deficits that need to be dealt with, and there's only a few ways you can deal with them. And so it's only natural that people would look at how we manage our cost and our workforce. It's surprising, as we've talked to economists this past week, including at the Fed, who tracks this all very closely, not a lot of work has been done on it yet, so we didn't get much guidance. So just to frame the topic, and again, there's a wide range of data you can find, but 200,000 plus federal workers in Virginia. This excludes active military. They're not counted in any of these stats. And then probably we think 300 to 350,000 federal workers who live in Virginia, which is the more important stat for us because that defines taxpayers. So that would size what the ultimate risk might be. I think you have to consider what's the composition of that look like in Virginia, because we would expect that military and Homeland Security is probably not going to be much at risk. You then have other essential services. For example, Postal Office. We have 40,000 federal employees in Virginia that are employed by the Post Office. So you can work yourself down to an overall number for Virginia and then what Northern Virginia exposure is. So certainly it's something we've got to watch closely. More analysis will be done. But we then step back and look at, from the overall budget, we have 4.2 million workers in Virginia. So as a percentage of total workforce, it's not insignificant, but it's not huge. We also have 240,000 open positions. Companies still working to find people to employ. And we still, obviously, with 2.9% unemployment, we continue to hear this all the time. I'm still having trouble finding workers. It's not as bad as it was, but it still is an issue. So at the same time, we have a really robust pipeline of new companies coming to Virginia, which is, if you add all those up, the people who have announced, we've given incentives to and are coming, on the order of 50,000 new jobs that'll be arriving over the next 3 to 5 years. So we'd like to think that if this happens, there will be opportunities for people to find good private sector employment. And I have a view that that's not a bad transition and actually would further diversify our economy. So long way of saying we all have to watch. It's something we are watching and need to be concerned about. But we do think that Virginia, actually, given where we are, is reasonably well positioned to respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that question. A lot of us were interested in that answer. Delegate Cliff Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Lucas, Secretary Cummings, thank you for your presentation. It sounds like the last few questions have really crystallized the fact that we don't operate in a vacuum and that Fed policy does have an enormous impact on the economy that we experience here in the Commonwealth. And so I'm interested in knowing, in your analysis, have we begun to consider some of the proposals that are to come with regards to tariffs and what impact that might have coming out of Hampton Roads with the ports that we have, but not only just there, across the Commonwealth with the goods and purchases, who ultimately ends up paying under those circumstances, we believe, happens to be the final consumer because it gets passed on. What effects can we expect that to have on our forecast?
Obviously, given what we're hearing out of our president-elect and his team, we do expect that we will see more tariffs coming. And everyone uses simple math and says, well, if this is inflation today, we need to add whatever tariffs add to get to what's going to happen to inflation. And I think the best answer to that is let's go back and look at during Trump's first term when there were massive tariffs implemented against China, 25% in the first round, bumped by another 10% in the second round, but then that was bumped to 25% more in the third round of this. And the reality of the impact on our economy was really not detectable. So inflation during his term, 2017 to 21, was 1.9%. So and it was on average the second lowest inflation rate of the last 10 president administrations. So the reason for that was other things that were taking place were strong dollar, confidence in our economy, productivity, and then onshoring of manufacturing, which was creating more jobs and creating more domestic competition for those services. So we don't accept that if this, then that results in X plus tariff rate. So I don't believe that that's something that should be a conclusion. I think you got to look at inflation and understand that what happened under the Biden administration, where we had over $2 trillion of additional stimulus going into an economy that already had supply chain issues, we ended up with the inflation rate at average of 5.2% and a peak of 9%, which is the highest in 40 years. There's a lot of dynamics here that go on, and we believe that a growing economy that's more robust can adjust to these tariffs if they get implemented. So thank you.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Continue.
So just an observation, that 2016 situation were more targeted tariffs, right? As opposed to now, the proposals we hear are across the board in a broad way for everything.
You mean considering regions or the products?
Products. And so that's a distinct difference between 2016 when it was more targeted towards certain countries or areas that were the products were coming from. And now we're hearing a more broad application of tariffs across everything, and that's a difference. And
I
then
hear you, but
secondly,
sorry.
with regards to manufacturing onshore, there are some who would believe that even under those circumstances, if we increase the manufacturing here and we're not making as much of a purchase on projects coming in, it still has a chilling effect on the final consumer because the labor overseas in certain places is much lower, whereas here, the cost for labor for those products is higher. Secondly, even here with that production, if we're importing parts and et cetera, and the tariffs are being applied there, then you're still getting that application of the higher costs of those goods.
I hear you. Back to your first point on what tariffs were applied to versus what's being said now. What they were being applied to were base materials that go into everything in our economy. Metals, energy. We disrupted our independence in energy by new constraints on oil and gas production. And so these things that happened actually impacted everything as we went forward into the Biden administration. During the Trump administration, the focus on steel, aluminum, and other more basic stuff was going to impact everything that would be largely manufactured, whether it's there or over here. So I don't think you can really separate the two based upon products. I just believe, and others who follow this, we also look at, in addition to those who say tariffs need to be added to inflation to get to the new world, we believe that this economy will absorb that and that new manufacturing will respond, and it will be competitive.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate McNamara.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your presentation. I think the progressive tax cuts and the reasonably low-cost tax improvement strategies are excellent. I go back to non-withholding, which I oftentimes do at this event. We've made a pretty significant change in the non-withholding forecast in December, but we still have only moved it about 3% from the prior year. Given the fact that PTET's worked its way through the system, given the fact that we've had a very robust stock market, I'm wondering why, if there's, you could share any kind of the thought process behind that reforecast being what I would consider too conservative.
Yeah, we've been conservative on this forever. And I think all of us, and we share this with the Money Committee staff, that let's not go spend that money as in any way think that it's a run rate spend. I think the reality is that there is a core of small business owners within that pass-through entity world that are doing much better, much like our corporate world and our individual income taxpayers. So we just continue to try to be extremely conservative on that. We have gotten much, much better in how we forecast that as well. I think you all have lived through the adjustments we've constantly had to make because this PTET was so driven by taxpayer behavior that we had models and expectations, but actually the behavior evolved over time as the taxpayer became more familiar with it. So we just feel like we should continue to play that conservatively, and we have good confidence in that number.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Delegate Lawfer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I was wondering, I'm a little concerned that there is nothing in the proposals here about affordable housing, which seems to be an issue throughout the state. And I was wondering if you had considered maybe a tax deduction or credit for renters, which might both help with the housing and possibly low income. Thank you.
Yep. That has not been part of our conversation, and I think on other specific items that are in the budget or not, following me is Director of DPB, Michael Mall, who's going to go through the specifics of spending, and some of those questions might be more appropriate for him. Okay?
Thank you. You're welcome. Delegate Hernandez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Secretary. Appreciated the conversation on the the standard deduction and hearing your perspectives on that. I'm wondering what your perspective is on the earned income tax credit. We've made some improvements there in terms of refundability, but I don't think I heard anything from the administration today. Is that baked in the forecast?
We have not adjusted that, and it remains in the budget. Had not made changes.
Thank you. I want to recognize all members. I'm trying to see if there were any other hands. Any further questions? Delegate Watts.
A further question on particularly the tax on tips, given that no other state does this. So my concern is, as I read the legislation, there was no definition really of what tips are, given that this is ground that hasn't been plowed before. And I look forward to a discussion before we act on any such legislation of how we define tips, again, absence any tax rulings, et cetera, of how those are defined. But I'm particularly concerned then in the administration of it, also in discussing with you about whether or not an individual who now would have to report tips to the employer within 10 days in the following month, and that information is going to go to the federal government with the idea that they might get a tax break in Virginia, but owe substantially more taxes on their federal return at a much higher rate than Virginia taxation. How are you playing through this in what is proposed?
Probably a better question to have the tax team go through with you how they calculated the FIS on this. It simply is cash tips plus those recorded digitally through payments on a credit or debit card is what's been used to estimate the liability here of what's been being paid today and what will no longer be paid. So I think that's probably a good follow-up question with the tax team.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Austin.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, please. Secretary Cummings, thank you for your presentation. Great job today. In 2022, after the pandemic, we had a tremendous outward migration, and Slide 8 shows a trend change there. What can you indicate or give an example of why we have that inward trend and why we have a growth of migration in Virginia now today?
Thank you. As I said, from day one, this has been, I would say, the ultimate metric. We run all of our areas. Every secretariat has a set of metrics that we all measure our performance by, called that we all are using and report out quarterly basis. That this metric is the one that kind of sums it all up, measuring the end result of all of the good things that are happening in Virginia that would make somebody want to come here and make other people not want to leave. So it goes from the educational stuff that's being done, the public health things that are being done, the public safety, the ability to recruit and attract companies, stuff that's been done about business-ready sites. And I think just an overall tone, seeing what the governor does, where he is calling CEOs every day as part of his daily routine to convince them to come to Virginia, that there's an old book called The Tipping Point. When people start buzzing about things, you kind of reach a point where it becomes a real reality. And I think that the sum total of all of these things, that the country is understanding that Virginia is truly open for business. We've cut regulations, just everything that contributes to being an open, receptive, and attractive place to live and do business. So I think that's how we all talk about this, and we've watched that tick up slightly in the last couple of years, and it looks like we're now going to cross the bar. And that's all the people to our south, we call our competitor states. That's been the case through that entire time frame. But if you look north, and we did a paper for Senator Eben on Maryland, it's scary what's going on. And I think we're moving to join the people who are winning to the south.
So follow up, Madam Chair.
Delegate Austin.
Mr. Secretary, would you say, I guess what I'm hearing you say is that's a statewide trend? Statewide. We're increasing the population in the Commonwealth statewide.
Yes, okay, domestic great. Net in-migration is absolutely contributing to the growth of the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there are no further questions of Secretary Cummings, Mr. Secretary, we'd like to thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Appreciate your remarks. At this time, I'd like to ask Mike Kamal to proceed with his presentation. And again, I'd like to ask that you keep your questions until the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. I gotta get out of here.
You gotta get out of here. Yeah. So, by 11:30, don't you think you ought to handle it by 11:30?
Absolutely. Good morning.
Senator Lucas.
I'd like to just remind the members of the Joint Committee that we do have another event following this Finance Committee meeting. So let's see if we can try to hold your comments so that we can try to get out on time. So please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas, Chairman Torian, Chairman Watts, and members of the money committees. Thank you for having me. Apparently, I'm not quite as tall as the governor or the secretary, so we had to make some adjustments here. Many of the things that I'll be going through, you've already heard. And so I'm going to try to go through fairly quick, but certainly looking forward to questions at
Please give your attention to the Director Mall. Thank you.
The first thing I just want to note, and I'll show you in more detail, is that the large chunk of this budget it relies on forecast, actual utilization of services, required investments that the General Assembly said should be made. That is really taking up a big chunk of the money that you're seeing, $1.56 billion. You heard about the car tax credits. That's $1.1 billion. Beyond other technical forecast items, there's additional support for K-12 pre-K totaling $211 million, which includes upgrading the standards of learning testing system, school accreditation, and opportunity scholarships. Over $166 million for IT. There is some money in K-12 that, if you add to that, would make it over $200 million. We got $130.8 million dedicated to workforce, economic development. We're investing in business-ready sites, life sciences, and worker-student training programs. For the behavioral mental developmental health safety net, $57.5 million. As you heard the governor say, much of that going to try to help with using for SCOPs at the hospitals. At the end, $56.3 million for public safety, emergency response, including disaster assistance fund, the governor mentioned, increased grant funding for school resource officers, and additional equipment for firefighters. So the first slide here is just to show you, you may remember for the last budget that you all passed, that the General Assembly put some markers down saying, hey, if we have more revenues in 24 than what we expected in the budget, that we should use it for very particular things. Now one of those things was we were going to use it for the required deposit to the Revenue Reserve Fund. You heard the governor say put money to I-81, $175 million. Also, the waivers, the VEMSTEP waivers, we put in additional $45 million a year because the 24 revenues were higher. And so we could afford to do this. Also $50 million for the combined sewer overflow in Richmond. The last two there you heard mentioned is based on the surplus. There was the WQIF calculations, WQIF A and B, and those are the money set aside for that. The one thing that's not showing here, and I'll talk about later, is that there also was a requirement that if we had enough money, that $400 million of general fund should be used to offset $400 million of bonds for wastewater treatment. And I'll mention that a little bit during capital. But at the end of the day, we're talking over $1 billion of requirements that that's either in law or the General Assembly said we should do in the introduced budget. On the forecast side and utilization, you will note that the biggest amount is really tied to Medicaid. We are having basically over $720 million in additional adjustments based on forecast and actual cost for direct aid in K-12 education. We're talking around $183 million. It takes up a bulk of this chart of over $1 billion. For Medicaid, I will say it is primarily because we're having more individuals who are not as healthy, needing more treatment, and the cost of health care is just going up. So the amount that you're seeing has to do with both a better adjustment and accounting for that cost, as well as some costs that were carried over from the end of 24 because we didn't have quite enough money there to cover it. And so that is involved with the Medicaid. I will note for English learning extra support for K-12, that's a high number, 110 million. You may remember that was a new requirement last session to provide more support for English learners. And we didn't have good data until this fall on how many individuals, how many students would be impacted to get that support. So the 110 million recognizes, now that we have the data, the additional funding that's required. I will also note that the budget assumed a certain level of student participation. It's higher than we expected, and it's going to cost us about 33.9 million more. But I will note that it's still fewer students than last year, and but the budget just did not account for a good forecast on that. So we have adjusted that. So bottom line, almost $1.1 billion are what we would call technical and forecast related. There are a few, what I call technical items too, that are reduction downwards of general fund spending. We've had more lottery profits going to K-12 education, and that means we have less general fund needed to be paid to K-12. We also have a little bit more expected in the health care fund, and that will help reduce a little bit, offset some of the general fund for Medicaid. I will note, even though it's $169 million of adjustment downwards, this does not result in a reduction of any services or any programs. These are all just technical adjustments based on the reality of the usage of these services and or the availability of revenues that have to go to certain programs. So I mentioned, you've heard much of this already, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but for other K-12 pre-K investments, you may remember that several years ago there was a requirement to make a more robust standards of learning for our students to help make sure that they're being fully educated and ready for the future. Our system, though, for tracking all that needs to be upgraded. And last year, the General Assembly said just to look at that and see what the cost would be. So we are putting in a recommended $61 million and $5 million ongoing. It's more expensive initially because we will have to continue the existing contract for 1 year till the new system is up and running. But this is an IT investment. I'll also note for new accreditation system, Board of Education is implementing, we expect some schools will have some challenges meeting it and could use some support. That's over the $50 million that you see there to help provide that additional resources and support. Governor mentioned $25 million for lab schools to work more closely with our HBCUs in Virginia. And I'm going to just mention the fourth one there, fifth one down. You may know that in many places in the state, there is not adequate child care or early learning for children. And this is an incentive fund proposal to try to get local governments and private sector to invest in those areas where child care is not available so that we can hopefully cover those child care deserts. In IT, you already heard the governor mention there's a handful of a variety of small things here, but the big one is the replacement of our tax collection system. I will say that's over 40 years old. No question needs to be done. As a reminder, again, the General Assembly put in some money to help study this. This is the cost that we believe will take care of it, and that will be upfront cost that will be used over a 3 to 4 year period to get it fully implemented while we're still using the present system. I'm going to jump next to economic development workforce, additional $50 million for business-ready sites, additional $35 million for the life sciences investment. You'll see that negative there. Basically, there was funding in the second year that was proposed to be moved to the first year to make it clear that we think this is a one-time investment where we expect private investment and revenues from those investments to help cover the cost for this in ongoing years. You may also remember last session, the General Assembly required that those students doing dual enrollment get to do it for free. Now, there was no funding put in the budget for that, so we're going to try to do our best to cover that at this time. We're proposing $15 million general fund, which is approximately equal to what the amount of tuition that the community colleges receive today, and that they utilize to help pay for the cost of giving the courses to the high school students. We're also proposing that $20 million in unused balances from the G3 program, which you may remember is another program that provides free community college for students of lower income that need help in participating. That program has not been fully utilized, and we're proposing that one-time use of $20 million be available to cover any cost if the demand is higher than we expect right now for dual enrollment, and also to cover the cost for allowing high school students to take CTE credential kind of courses with the community college system. Now, I suspect we'll have better data coming up so that for the biennial budget, we'll know the true cost of this and how much is really needed, but we think this is a good marker to put down to have this move forward. I'll also just mention the $12 million for trying to continue to increase our nursing workforce out there. This is going to be competitive grants for public colleges and universities with nursing programs, try to get more faculty, try to retain faculty, and also look for innovative ways to graduate more nurses. On the behavioral mental health, developmental health safety net, you already heard the governor talk about SCOPs and possible grants to hospitals that they can use to contract for individuals that could provide that law enforcement oversight. We also included a proposed $3.65 million to help pay for travel costs for local law enforcement that have less resources to handle it and maybe longer distance to have to take people. And then finally, just at a high level, public safety. You heard the governor talk about the Disaster Assistance Fund. As you know, Virginia historically has not had a pot of money to set aside for disasters. We've dealt with them as times have happened. The proposal is a $25 million general fund. The governor mentioned a non-general fund of over $100 million. That being proposed is uncommitted balances from RGGI. You may remember that we've utilized those funds before to deal with flood relief out in Southwest Virginia. I'll mention the School Resource Officer Incentive Grants Fund, proposed $6.8 million more there. $5 million is a new program that I'll end on public safety for local fire companies that don't have much in resources to buy equipment that they need, especially like breathing apparatus, and that would allow them hopefully to have a little bit of extra money that they could utilize to bolster their safe fighting of fires. So you've basically seen everything that's in there of high level, but I will note, and this is just one-stop shopping for your perusal, all the top 25 amendments cover 97.7% of all the requests being proposed by the governor. So you can look through those as a resource. And quickly on capital, there is new general fund support of nearly $1.4 billion to support capital, but as a reminder, $400 million of that was intended by the General Assembly to supplant bonds that were provided for wastewater treatment. So that is what's being proposed in the budget, leaving a total new funding of $967 million. There's also some non-general fund projects in there for higher education that will have 9D and 9C revenue bonds. And of course, you guys, the General Assembly will certainly be able to vote on the 9C as separate legislation also. Real quick, I'll just highlight, there's a lot in there, and certainly any questions you may have or any follow-up later on, but $80.4 million to basically deal with supplementing existing projects or those that have change in scope. 14 projects for $255.2 million to address life safety and other issues and maintenance type needs, primarily in higher education and behavioral health. Have 8 new projects that we're proposing move forward with, again, primarily in higher education with a chunk also going to state police. As you also may remember, when we do capital, we typically do not fund equipment and fixtures and furniture until the facility is closer to coming online. And so we have 4 projects we expect to come online. That's the $14.5 million. And then finally, we have about 8 projects in higher education, behavioral health, and at Woodrow Wilson that we're recommending for planning for future possible spending of capital. This last one is just to show you, you see the highlighted gold yellowish line there? That is the total net increase in general fund proposed spending in 25 and 26 from the governor's amendments. And then the green shade is the total amount for capital being proposed in the budget. I will note that, as the secretary said, we believe we have a structurally balanced budget when you look out over 6 years. And I'll say that if you go to our website, dpb.virginia.gov, you will see that 6-year plan with every single assumption in detail about how we came up with that. And you also can get the budget document, which actually gives a budget bullet for every single item that we're proposing as amendments, so you can see a little more description of what's in there. And so at the end, Madam Chairman, that's my presentation, and looking for any questions.
Thank you, Director Mall. Any questions of the Director Mall?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Let's see. I saw Senator Hashmi's hand first, and then I'll go to Senator Favola.
That's fine.
I'm looking for hands so I can get them in order. And Delegate Sickles, in that order.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director, for your presentation. You know, when the governor made his presentation this morning, I was very encouraged to hear that he was prioritizing our English language learners. That is an area that so many of us have been working on, and there's such great need in our school systems. However, when I take a look at your presentation, I see that the increase is actually, the $110 million increase is actually for it's a technical amendment based on the data that we're now seeing in our.
Right.
Am I missing any other investments? Are there any additional investments that the governor is making rather than just the technical adjustment that we see in the budget?
Well, I say it's a technical, I say that in the sense that that's what the data was showing we should provide. It's always an option whether to give more funding or not. So that, in that sense, the governor felt it was important to put that in. So I don't want to imply that he's just doing it because it's technical. I mean, there's always choices to be made on any of these forecasts or any of these adjustments of whether you want to provide them or not. And so, yes, no, he supports that, and that was why the money was put in, to make sure we covered it.
Well, thank you for that, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up. So I appreciate that, and I'm hoping that because he's highlighted it as a priority this morning, I'm hoping that we can continue to work to increase the support and the resources that all of our school divisions need to address this particular student population. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Favola, and then Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Madam
Quickly,
Chair.
please.
My question is that we have made some investments in upgrading technology systems like we have, I think it's the welfare impact system that's part of DSS. The local DSS agencies actually use that when they're trying to access services or do a number of other collaborative things with the state. If those systems have not been fully implemented, have you subtracted that money, or is it still in certain pots so they can continue with contracts that have not yet been completed?
Nothing has been reduced in the budget. Nothing's been taken away from anybody. I know that there's some agencies that are relying on the federal ARPA funding to help cover some of that. And we've done a great job of committing every single dollar to meet the federal deadline, which is at the end of this month. And so everybody's moving forward, doing the best they can to try to utilize that. And certainly any general fund money that might be committed to a IT project, the governor has always, even if there was no mandatory requirement to carry it over, the governor has always carried it over to make sure the money is still there for them.
Okay, good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Following Delegate Sickles
Madam
is
Chair.
Delegate Keys Gamara.
Yep. Madam Chair, I've got 3 short questions.
Sure.
Okay. The first one is the governor, and I'm assuming the answer is no, is he recommending any changes to the VMZEPS program from a policy position, or you're just asking for more
Not from
money?
a policy, but more the fact that the proposed $60 million from the
So
actual
we're going to still
surplus.
pay for a graduate student
Well, no,
education from Kansas, who lives in Kansas?
Yeah, well, no, none of those policy changes have been proposed one way or the other.
Okay, I'm
in
just
the
asking
budget.
if you
It's the
were-
same program.
All right. Second question is,
Delegate Sickles,
thank you.
could you pause right there for a moment? I'm not sure we fully grasp that answer about Kansas.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Is there the question?
I think you said yes, no, but I want to know which is the answer.
Madam Chair, I think he said that there are no policy
changes
suggested
in the budget
on, putting some guardrails around the program. None. Just more money. That's what I heard.
Our estimates are from.
And just want to be clear about Kansas. Delegate Sickles, you have 2 more questions before we go to Keys Gamara.
Yeah. Okay. Second question was about, we're trying to build up a crisis response, capacity across the Commonwealth. And if we build this up like we want to build, we're not going to need the SCOPs in the long run. Do you agree with that? I mean, the SCOPs are going to, I'm not opposed to supplementing what the deputy sheriffs are doing and what the police are doing, but we're trying to build a system that avoids that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why this is set up as a grant program and not, meaning that when it's not needed, it's pretty much easier to take it away.
Okay, so I want the world to know that it's not permanent, what you're suggesting.
It doesn't have to be permanent. And as the governor stated, he thought that eventually we should not need this kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. My last question is if he could explain to us how the incentive program works for childcare, your proposal to create an incentive program to have more childcare. How does that work? And how does it relate to the 3 programs that we have already?
Yeah, basically my understanding is that the idea is to have incentive grants to try to get localities, employers, and everyone else to put monies together to maybe have a location that could be utilized and support all the parents in the region.
Can I follow up? Yeah.
Before, if they don't have access right now to such a type of facility.
So we have 3 programs that are very different, and one of them is called mixed delivery. How is this one going to be different from, say, mixed delivery?
Well, my understanding, mixed delivery already deals with those that exist. This is hoping that we'll create new and ones where there are none existing right now.
Madam Chair, if we put more money into mixed delivery, we would maybe get more.
I don't have a good answer for that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the incentive is you're going to have a grant program to incent people to start one of the programs that we already have.
Basically, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to ask Delegate Keys Gamara to please bring us the last question because we're at a time where we need to. I'm sorry. I'm going to recognize Keys Gamara and then Senator Borsco, and those are the last 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping to get some clarification, sir. Earlier, there was mention that we felt we had a surplus in the 529 program, and we would be using funds from that to help the deficit in VMSDAP. And I'd like to know what analysis or how we arrived at the belief that we had excess money in the 529 program, as I believe there will be parents concerned in my locale. And I'd like for you to assist me to explain to them why this might be appropriate.
I certainly am not the expert on this, though I will note that JLARC just came out with a report not too long ago identifying those balances. In fact, I think that might have been something discussed last session on what might be done with those. And there's apparently a number of legal complications about trying to get that money back to anybody. And so the thought was, if we really are going to have this surplus sitting there, and how do we best utilize it? And the thought was to use it as a corpus to basically get your 5-6% return off the top, $60 million, to utilize towards what we think will be the need for the VEMSTEP program with the growth that it's incurring. So that's the proposal. But I think for more specifics, that I would recommend looking at the JLARC report because they know much better than I do all the subtleties about it.
Senator Boysko, you will have the last question for this meeting.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. As you all are aware, we spent a lot of time on transportation, helping to fill a budget hole for the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority over the past year, and in our budget, reserved funding for that while we're looking at long-term funding for the system. I did notice in the proposed budget amendments here that $10 million was removed from the amounts that we had passed in last year's budget. I'm wondering if you might be able to help me understand why that was.
I apologize. I should be able to tell you exactly why that was, and I don't have a good answer. And I don't, anybody will help me?
Madam Chair, can I follow up on Senator Favola?
Apparently there was more money provided than what we thought our commitment was as a surplus amount.
Madam Chair.
Follow up?
Yes, so we worked very diligently with WMATA and as legislators agreed that was the amount that was needed, and just wanted to highlight that. I noticed that there was a change in that amount.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
There being no further questions, I want to thank the members of the committee for their participation. I certainly want to thank you, Director Morrow, for your presentation. So let's give him a hand. And I want to remind everybody that copies of the presentations are posted on the committee website. And for further details about the governor's budget amendments, please refer to the Department of Planning and Budget website, and you all know what that is. And so with that, you all, this meeting is adjourned. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.